Hey horror fans, welcome back to Room 237. Come at you with another collection video. And this was a video that up until recently I wasn't even planning on doing, but a good friend of mine was just doing some spring cleaning and gave me boxes of these. A lot of them I already had, but he was more than generous to give me his extras, even of first editions. And, you know, book club edition replicas of first editions, but still some first editions. Pretty much what was my introduction at a very young age, adult horror. I learned how to read with Goosebumps, eventually got up to Alvin Schwartz, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, and 4th or 5th grade I landed on Stephen King, which of course, born and raised in Maine, you're gonna know who Stephen King is. And, you know, I don't remember if it was 4th or 5th grade when I actually started reading his books. I don't even remember what the first one, I think the first one I read was Christine, but I've read Christine twice. I read it, pretty sure in 4th grade, and I read it again in 8th, and 8th was when it really stuck with me and I remembered it. I read Carrie in like 6th grade, don't really remember much of it. Shining, Pet Sematary, 6th, 7th grade. Lost bookmark about halfway through. Never went back to find my spot. I do have a favorite book, and I'll show that. But, you know, at that young of an age, I would go to, like, secondhand paperback stores and just buy his books. And then an older cousin of mine gave me like a box of her Stephen King books that my grandmother gave to her that were all first editions. And so I've had those, and that was in probably 6th grade. I was probably 11 or 12 when she gave me all those. And then a friend of mine recently gave me boxes of Stephen King books, more first editions and book club editions. But so this is my Stephen King book collection, 2.5 minutes in. The first book I ever had given to me was from my cousin because she already had it, and that's the complete and uncut version of The Stand, which is a mammoth of a book. I think this was the first one I attempted to read, but I was kind of intimidated by the size as a 4th grader. And, you know, just some of the bigger words was a little bit beyond what I was used to. Even though I was on, 4th grade. I think I was on at least a 6th or 7th grade reading level, but this was a little bit higher. But I also have the, original hardcover of the first complete and uncut. This is one my friend gave me. It's a little beat up, but it's still cool to have. Another one of the first things I ever got was, and it's in the bag because it was beat to hell when I got it then off eBay because it was out of print, the original Creepshow comic. Technically the first comic I ever read, even before The Killing Joke. And you see my review of Creepshow, the movie. That's the movie that got me into adult horror when I was like 7. So reading this was really awesome. And, alright, I guess I'll just show some random ones. This is the only version of Carrie I have. Like, this is just like a Goodwill kind of version. Why they cut the cover, I don't know. I would love to get a first edition hardcover of this. Stephen King's first book. And there's a nice introduction by Tabitha King, his wife, in this one. And then I had somewhere, I don't know what happened to it, the complete version of this, but this is how I read it. The 6-book serial of The Green Mile, which is how it was originally released. Great story. I think I actually liked the books better than the movie, which is always the case. The books are almost always better. And then I'm just going to show this series real quick, and I don't have all of them. And I never actually started reading these just because I wanted to get all of them first, and then, you know, for some reason I just never got into it. I haven't seen the movie either, but Dark Tower 1, The Gunslinger, and these, like, Signet books that has like these kind of covers, I had a bunch of. It was mostly these when I started buying them as a kid, just like this series or this style. Gunslinger. The other ones I have are a bit older. They're not first editions. They don't have the original artwork, but Drawing of the Three and The Wastelands. First time I saw this cover when I was a kid, when my grandmother was getting all of them together to give to my cousin, I thought this is what the Langoliers was, because that reminded me of some of what I remember, because I was like 4 when that was on TV, and I remember my parents watching it. I thought this was the Langoliers. And then there's A Wizard in Glass, Volume 4. This I actually got when it was new, Wolves of the Calla. And I got this when it was new, Dark Tower 6, Songs of Susanna. I do know that, I believe there's 9 volumes actually. And I do know that people, like Stephen King fans, they love the Dark Tower series. I think they really shouldn't have done a movie. They should do like a Netflix series of it. But yeah, maybe eventually I'll get to it. But alright, now, how about the ones that I know you guys want to see? Of course, even though this isn't my favorite Stephen King book, it is my favorite movie, even though the movie is nothing like the book. But for years, I wanted the original hardcover of this, because it is my favorite movie of all time. That is The Shining. Now, this is a book club edition, because, you know, it doesn't have the complete back, doesn't have the dust jacket price. This is one that my friend gave me. It does have the laminate protector on it, which is kind of funny because I just bought online another book club edition, which is, I guess, the more traditional book club edition where they're smaller. So now I have 2 different copies, but I've always wanted this version of The Shining, the original cover. Funny story, when my grandmother got all her Stephen King books out of her cellar to give to my cousin when I was in 3rd grade, I think, she had found this later on by itself. And she saw that the first line in the book is, Jack Torrance thought, a vicious little prick. And she knew I was getting into Stephen King at that time, reading his books, watching his movies. She thought that was a little too inappropriate. She thought it smelt moldy, like a cellar. She made me walk it out to the dumpster. And it was a legit first edition. Years later, I told her and my grandfather what a first edition goes for. I thought my grandfather was gonna have a heart attack. That fucking sucks. But yeah, not my favorite Stephen King story, but the most cherished books I have, because The Shining means so much to me. My favorite Stephen King book, actually, and I guess you could say story, but favorite book is A Misery. And even though Stanley Kubrick's Shining is like its own thing, I would say this is the best adaptation, because it's the movie is. I would say that's the best adaptation because it is very close to the source material. And this is just a great story. This was the first Stephen King book I really had a hard time putting down while reading it. I had already seen the movie, but yeah, this is definitely my favorite Stephen King book. And then these are all book club editions, like Salem's Lot. True first edition goes for a fucking fuckload of money. I do know where there is one for $100 down at a flea market. Would love to save up for that, but Salem's Lot. This one he just gave me. I've never owned this before. I've seen it before. This is another, I believe this is another a book club edition, or it's a first. Might actually be a first edition. Thinner, which is actually under his Richard Bachman a pseudonym. The movie is really cheesy, but I do like the story. Thinner. And then, just between getting books myself and people giving me books, I do have 3 different book club editions of Night Shift, which a first edition does go for plenty. At his first short story collection. All right. So then I have 2 first editions, legit first editions, kind of beat up, of Cujo, which I did read this book as a kid. I remember checking this out of the public library, actually, when I was 10 or 11. I had seen bits of the movie. I had seen the ending of the movie on cable, but I didn't really know the movie that well. I liked Cujo. I do know that this one's kind of beat up. I don't mind having 2 copies. I do know that this is the one book that Stephen King wishes he could go back and rewrite or unwrite because of the ending. He doesn't really remember much of it at all because this was in the 80s during his alcohol and drugs and everything. Another one of my favorites, and I do like both versions of film, and these are both first editions. One is in better condition than the other. Pet Sematary. I really liked this book, but I was a bit more temperamental as a kid, and when I lost my bookmark, which was, in a copy like this, I just got frustrated and didn't look for my spot again. But I do know how much of a depressing read this book is. I do know the differences in the films and just how... I know Stephen King put the manuscript in a drawer for a while because he disturbed his own self about what he put in here. I do know it's a tough read. Another one of my favorite books of his, Christine. Also one of my favorite movies of his, directed by John Carpenter. I also have the smaller book club edition. Read this both 4th and 8th grade, and I loved this book. Another one that's pretty close to the source material, but I really, really like Christine. And this is one that's, actually, these two kind of go together because they're linked together by one plot device. But I believe first was Dolores Claiborne, which is more of a drama. It looks like a horror story, but it's a drama. Really good movie with Kathy Bates. I actually really like the movie. It's a pretty depressing story, but kind of different for Stephen King. But I really like Dolores Claiborne. And the plot device is a solar eclipse that happens at the same time as Gerald's Game, which the Netflix movie of this, I thought was very well done. I really like the Netflix movie of this. This is, the book's a little bit more graphic in its nature. And I do know that some of the paperbacks used to have the disclaimer of like adults only. But I like Stephen King stories more so like these and Cujo, where there's less supernatural and just more about characters. Also, that's why I love A Misery so much. But these two are good stories. Which actually, the reason why he wrote A Misery was because, and I've never owned this book, and I've rarely ever seen it, like, like in person, Eyes of the Dragon, which is not horror. It's actually like a kid's book, like a young adult Harry Potter age book. You know, about dragons and knights and princes, princesses, and stuff like that. And this book was ravished, like just savaged by critics and fans because it wasn't master of horror Stephen King. He actually wrote it for his kids, his daughter, who's into this kind of stuff. And he felt trapped writing horror stories, so that's why, and you know, he got savaged for doing something different, so that's why he wrote this. So I'm actually kind of glad he wrote this because we got my favorite story out of it. Oh, I'm kind of making a mess over here, and I still got a lot more to do. I did read at one point that this was his most proud work. Another collection, Different Seasons, which collects The Body, which would become Stand By Me, Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption. The other two stories, which Apt Pupil, which I know became a movie that I've never seen, and The Breathing Method, Woman Determined to Give Birth No Matter What. And some of these books my grandmother did write her name and date in, so devalued any of them worth money, but I'm just glad to have the original hardcovers with the dust jackets. So, Different Seasons. And then I know this became a really stupid TV miniseries, Tommyknockers. I can't remember which is the true first edition, because I know there's other ones where Stephen King is in red letters. Tommyknockers. Dark Half, which there is a film directed by George Romero that I've never seen. This is, I believe, a first edition as well, Dark Half. And this is a first edition, and this is really the only version of this story that I like. I think both films are overrated, you know, in their own way. I don't love them like everyone else does, but that's it. Another mammoth-sized book. The book really does have a lot of inventive ideas, is a nice big epic story. And I think I started reading this, and I don't remember what happened. Either I forgot a lot of it, or I was like breeze reading. I don't really remember. Alright, so those are his, well, I guess before I don't say classics, I also had two versions of Insomnia, which when the Al Pacino, Robin Williams movie came out, I thought it was this. I always thought these covers were kind of lame, but I got two versions of Insomnia. Alright, I guess we'll do these. Yes, I have more. Another, short story collection, which two of these became films. One was The Langoliers, which is an awful TV miniseries, and the other one was Secret Window with Johnny Depp, and that is 4 Past Midnight, which is a book I've never owned up until a friend of mine gave me this, but I've seen this one before, 4 Past Midnight. For the longest time, I had the paperback of this, but now I have the hardcover. It is kind of beat up, and it's another short story collection, Skeleton Crew. This became a movie as well. I saw it when I was a kid. I don't really remember a damn thing from it, but I do know a lot of people like it. This is sort of, when was this? Early 90s, I think. Sort of like when Stephen King was, because there's 1991. There's definitely different eras of King. You know, you had straightforward horror 70s, and you have classic 80s, and then the 90s where it got kind of weird. But Needful Things, which is kind of a story that we've all seen or heard before. This is known as the last Castle Rock story. Kind of like Something Wicked, This Way Comes. You know, this sort of novelty store where your favorite item is there, but it makes you do bad things. Owned by the devil. Needful Things. I'll actually save that because that's a sequel. This is one I've never owned, and I've heard of it, but I've never actually seen it in person. Rose Matter. I don't even really know a lot about this book. This one became a really bad movie, and I know this was the first book he wrote after being struck by a van in the early 2000s. Maybe this book is better. This is another one that my friend gave me. I'm not a fan of the movie at all, and that is Dreamcatcher. I thought the movie was actually pretty bad. You know what? Let me make different stacks here. All right. Another collection. Everything's Eventual. I've always liked that cover. Which, there's a story in here that's pretty much like Slender Man. Then you have the two books that when you put them together, you get one big cover. Let's see if I do this right. One is Stephen King, one is Richard Bachman. And that is Richard Bachman's The Regulators and Stephen King's Desperation. Which I know Desperation became a TV, a movie as well. Running out of space here. Bag of Bones, which I've seen the movie, didn't really care for the movie. Now, this is an older one. The Talisman, which I believe was his first collaboration, which he did it with Peter Straub. King really didn't like it and said he would never collaborate again. But they did do a sequel years later with Black House. So there's those two. Don't really know what either one is about. And now we're getting into some of his newer ones that I'm not too... No, I got most of them as gifts. Don't really have a clue what they're about. And I don't really know. Doohickey. I know this became a TV series that I heard people liked, but I never got around to seeing it. Under the Dome. And I believe this became a Netflix special. 11/22/63. Yeah, I gotta get a shelf for all these because sitting in the bedroom for so long just builds up dust, even more so than on a shelf. 11/22/63. Trying to get these back in some sort of order here, so from when I put them away. And the last stack is some of his newer ones, like 1922, which is a Netflix film as well. I know this is part of a bigger collection, but this is it by itself. Elevation, one of his newest ones. I actually got this last Christmas. It says a novel, but it's pretty much a short story. His newest one, which I've heard is really good, and I'm actually interested in checking it out. The Institute, which I'm surprised my friend gave me this because it's like brand new. He just finished it. Sort of a Richard Bachman revival. Blaze, which came out a few years ago. This, which I know became a movie and I didn't see it. I don't really care to, but Cell. I remember when this came out. Like, people were saying a killer cell phones. He's all the way down to that. Maybe the book is better. And then short stories, Just After Sunset. And then the last thing I have, oh nope, it's not at all. 4 early novels by Richard Bachman, which I would love to get Rage and The Long Walk by itself. Rage, it goes for stupid amounts of money because King let it go out of print because of its connection with school shootings. The Long Walk is basically Hunger Games, but awesome from what I've read about it. But it's contained in this. That's really the only way you can get Rage. And then I just have these smaller books like classic Dead Zone, which I used to have in hardcover. I think I tossed it out because it was full of mold. Because it was from a cellar or a basement. But Dead Zone, love the Cronenberg film. I remember when this came out, and it does come with another story in it, but Blockade Billy, another one my friend gave me. A memoir of how to write, on writing, which I've heard is pretty good and very interesting. This is another story I would be into, and actually wouldn't be a bad book to get younger readers into Stephen King. The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon. Just, you know, a girl who loves a young girl, like a kid girl, who idolizes Tom Gordon of the Red Sox. She goes out for a hike, gets lost in the woods, and it's her survival out in the woods. And it's sort of like hunger hallucinations and creepy sounds that she hears. And this was one of the first books I read. And of course, it has artwork by Bernie Wrightson, who did Creepshow. Bernie Wrightson's done a lot of shit. Cycle of the Werewolf, which of course would go on to become the film Silver Bullet. So yeah, that's all my Stephen King books. I know I don't have Firestarter or I used to have Nightmares and Dreamscapes. I don't know what the hell happened to it. There's a bunch of newer ones that he's done that I'm not super familiar with. But, yo, well, why don't I just look at one of his newer books that has a list of all his shit in it. I doubt this will. No, it won't. Go as far back as Bag of Bones. I know these books usually has a list of other books to check out by him. Unfucking believable. Just because I can't think of any on top of my head right now. You rotten bitch. Okay. Bear with me. I will find one that has a list of all his books in it. Here we go. It's a Firestarter. And Richard Bachman books. Collections. The only one I don't have is Nightmares and Dreamscapes. The only other nonfiction is Dance Macabre, which I've never even seen in person. So yeah, all the way up until Dolores Claiborne, I have all but Firestarter. And I would love to get first editions of, you know, ones I have like book club editions of, like Salem's Lot. But anyway, that is my enormous Stephen King book collection. Let me know what your favorite books are. You know, try to keep it books, not movies, and that could be a whole separate video. But if you stuck through the whole video, thank you for watching.